Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Good evening. Well, it's good to see you. Wow, all these familiar faces. I think I've been here before, haven't I? Since 1965. Can you believe that? Wasn't it? Where's Dad? Dad's here too. Hi, Dad. We've been out here since I was about 1 or 2 years old. 1 year old. I was 1965. We moved out here. So this has been my stomping ground. This has been our home turf for that length of time. What am I? 49 now. So 48 years, and that's good. I got my math down straight, don't I? So it's good to be here. Wow, it's just a blessing to see a lot of friends and folks from this area. I want to start with a little bit of history, but let me say that the reason why I'm here is because of that man over there, my dad. You know, my father is my hero. My dad made some steps of faith back in 1968, 69, and that made all the difference in the world to me. And I'm going to share some of that with you this weekend. But you know, my heritage is sitting right in this room today, and so is my family, by the way. My wife Brenda's over here, and Emily's there, and I think Daniel's back there, Rebecca Joy's over there, and Bethany and Abigail. I don't get my whole family together in a conference very often, so this is a treat for us. We're actually sort of on vacation, but Tim asked if I would come by and share just a little bit about what God has been doing in our lives and how God has been directing us in the strengthening of the family in the 21st century. And that's, of course, kind of a theme of my program, my era program from my basement out in the eastern plains of Colorado, a safe distance from the demise of Western civilization, as I usually say every single morning as I address quite a few people. We have about 100 nations that tune into our program, and folks from all over America. And in fact, we were just in New Zealand, Australia, had a great time, met with about 1,000 people over 4 conferences over 10 days, and it was a great time. You know, the same issues affecting us are affecting parents all around the world. The same things that are eating the family alive and destroying the faith in the Western world, England and Sweden, and Australia and New Zealand, same stuff's affecting us too, and the same message. Same Word of God applies, isn't that something? No matter where you go, if you take the Word and you apply it, you bring it to where everybody is, it really does apply. Well, anyway, it began for us in the 1960s. I was homeschooled for the first time by my mother in Portland, Oregon, I think in 1967, 68, in that period of time. My mother started to homeschool us. That's where I learned to read, and we've been homeschooling now for a long, long time. So really, homeschooling is sort of in our blood, and that's a big part of what I do. I encourage a lot of folks who are in the homeschooling movement. So I want to share a couple reasons why we like to homeschool, if that's okay, from the outset, just to get a little insight on who we are. One reason why we like to homeschool and have for the last 20 years out in Colorado is because we don't have to ask the school district for permission if we want to go hunting for 2 weeks in October. You know, we just take off, get our guns and go. And that's really convenient because my daughter, Rebecca, got her first tag, was it like 2 years ago now? 2 years ago, and she got a tag for a deer in our area, and she was hunting for 10 full days. She crawling around our 20 acres and our neighbor's acreage, and finally, like an hour before hunting season was over, it was like 4 p.m., before the sunset in December, and I was doing the radio show, and a deer walked right by the window behind me. And so we called Becca. She was at a different property, and we got her in, and she had a 30-06, and we were going through the house, and it was right in the utility room. The deer was right through the utility room, but I had to open the door first. So I said, okay, get your finger off the trigger. Dad's opening the door. Okay, so she's resting it there right on the washing machine, And Mom's sitting there going, she's not going to shoot from inside the house, is she? Shh. I'm trying to get Mom to, it's going to happen, And so, boom, she brought the deer down. We had venison for about, 6 months, really, after that, so that was nice. So see, now that's home education, That's the way education ought to be, you know what I'm saying? Is just get your 30-06, and you bring the deer down, and you eat venison for the next 6 months. So anyway, that's one reason. Number 2 reason why we like to homeschool is you can pray anytime you want to. I mean, you could just, in the middle of the whole day, you could pray to God at 140 decibels. And the ACLU will not sue you. Isn't that cool? You can even pray without ceasing, which I think is great. Sounds almost biblical, doesn't it? And pray without ceasing. That ought to be in the Bible somewhere. Okay. Number 3 reason why we like to homeschool is our kids can be in 4 grade levels at the same time. Our kids have no idea what grade they're in. You know, you ask them, and people ask your kids, honey, you homeschool, what grade are you in? And they look dumb. Like deer in the headlights, you know. Grade? I'm homeschooled. And that's not real helpful, you know. So you got to step in and say, he's 10 years old, he's algebra 2, so back off. Okay, number 4 reason why we like to homeschool is as a homeschool graduate myself, I can have a class reunion anytime I want to. So it's kind of neat. Number 5 reason why we like to homeschool, you know, we've never had trouble with school bullies. Of course, I guess there's one incident about 12 years ago. We just spanked him, and that was the end of it. So, number 6 reason why we like to homeschool, you can bring guns to school with you. But I think I mentioned that, didn't I? You can't do that in the public schools, I hear. They frown on that, don't they? They frown on that if you take a gun to school? My son always felt like he studied better with his .22 leaned up against his desk. And, okay, you know, that's okay. We can handle it. Number 7 reason why we like to homeschool, we've never missed the bus. Just neat. You wave at it as it goes by. We do that. Bye. My kids have called it the jail bus. Here goes the jail bus, Dad. Can we free the inmates? No, sit down. You get in trouble for that. Number 8 reason why we like to homeschool, we just prefer pajamas to school uniforms ourselves. You know, it's a preference issue. Number 9, there's always somebody to take out the trash. And the number 10 reason why we like to homeschool, the school staff, we're totally in love with each other and we make out in front of the class. All right. See, these are things you can't do in conventional schooling. Okay, have I sold anybody yet? How many of you homeschool? We got a few homeschoolers? I thought so. Okay, I thought there were a few homeschoolers that relate to some of the things I'm talking about here. Well, friends, God has blessed our family tremendously, tremendously. My brother Tim's over there. Hi, Tim. You know, God has blessed our family where all 6 children are serving God somewhere around the world today. Thanks to what? Thanks to God's grace. Amen? God's grace, mom's prayers, dad's selection in discipleship. I think a lot of these things tie in. Ultimately, it's the grace of God that brings about this amazing thing where my mom and dad, after all those years, there are still 6 children serving the Lord somewhere around the world today. So many families do not enjoy that. I did a series of programs on my program, maybe about 8 years ago, where I was looking for people who had raised kids in the 70s and 80s, and all of the kids were serving the Lord today. And I didn't find too many of them, and part of the reason for that is because there really is a lapse in the faith, and that's what the statisticians are telling us. I'm reading all these articles, you know, the end of Christian America, Newsweek magazine, 3 years ago, and the Pew Research study that came out recently, and all these statistics are showing that it's not looking that good. The most shocking study that I saw was from Barna, who said in the the Mosaic generation, the 18 to 25-year-old crowd, only 0.5% believe that there are absolutes, down from 18% with their parents, indicating a 97% drop in just the last generation for those who still somewhat are hanging on to the semblance of somewhat of a Christian worldview, that is, they believe in absolutes. And to me, that's significant. That's really significant. 97% in one generation. Their parents, 18% still believing. The next generation, the Mosaic generation, 0.5% no longer believe in absolutes. I mean, that's off the cliff. That's falling off the cliff. So these things concern me. Moreover, I'm concerned because a lot of my friends, people I know, I mean, these are real human beings. My brothers and sisters in Christ, church leaders, pastors, mainline leaders. In fact, one of the most important leader in America, Christian leader in America, evangelical Christian leader in America, his son just committed suicide. Now see, you read these things And that needs to rip your heart out. I mean, David himself had some of these issues, didn't he? And he cried out about his son Absalom, and he was himself very concerned about this. And it's just so heart-wrenching to see what is going on in our generation. It's one reason why we're doing what we call a Gen 2 survey. It was just released 3 weeks ago. I've been planning this out for about 8 years. And what I want to do is I want to get some wisdom here as to what happened in the millennial generation. This is, as far as we know, the most severe apostasy in the history of the Christian faith, at least numbers-wise, over 2,000 years. People are walking away. England, Germany, France, etc., that pretty much already happened. But in America, it's happening right now. The demise of the faith is happening even as we speak. What England was going through in the 40s and 50s and 60s, when the Beatles were attending their church and then turned into Hindus in the 60s, see, that happened already in England, but that is going on right now in our country. So we are sponsoring a Gen 2 survey where we're trying to identify the 18 to 38-year-old crowd, find out where they are today, and specifically target those raised in Christian homes in the 1990s and look especially at homeschoolers, but also a wider group of those attending Christian schools, public schools, etc. And we want to look at 4 factors because we don't believe that it ties into one factor. We don't think it's just if you homeschool, everything will be hunky-dory, okay? Believe me, I have been in Christian leadership, homeschool leadership, church leadership for a long time, and I will tell you that just turning on one switch and finding, the button and hitting the homeschool button, everything's going to be good forever and ever, amen. No way. It doesn't work that way at all. We're looking at other things, not just education methodology, but what about family relationships? Let's say families tried to homeschool, but the mother-daughter relationships or the father-son relationship sort of stunk to high heaven. If that be the case, do you really think we're going to have a good result in the end? Do family relationships matter? And how much do they matter? How important are they? Number 3, culture. Number 3, culture. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. But culture, I think, is important. It's not just education. But do you think that what comes in the iPods, do you think the movies they watch, do you think the peer groups they hang out with, do you think the culture really has an influence in the way they turn out, the worldviews and faith perspectives that they will retain 20, 40 years from now? I think it does. I think culture is a major player. And then number 4 is church involvement. There are homeschool families that absent themselves from churches, by the way, and somehow they think that's all going to turn out well. As it turns out, the church is important. Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. So anyway, we're looking at these 4 factors, and we're hoping to gather about 20,000 people. If you know anybody who's 18 to 38 years of age, anybody, doesn't matter if they're Christians or non-Christians. Specifically, we're looking at those raised in Christian homes, but it doesn't matter. If you know somebody in the millennial generation who could take the 18 to 38 crowd and take this survey, please let them know about gen2survey.com. It's gen2survey.com. Again, we're trying to get 20,000 to take the survey, and it's hopefully going to be a definitive survey relating to the ongoing apostasy among the millennial generation to hopefully give some of the younger parents, some of the next generation parents, some wisdom. I have a feeling we're going to find that some of us older parents made a few mistakes in the 1990s, and if we discover that, wouldn't you say that's okay, something to repent of in the next generation, etc.? Yeah, I think it would be great wisdom to pass on to the next generation. So in February of next year, we're going to pull together as many pastors, youth pastors, leaders across America who are interested in these things and have a conference in Chicago, Illinois to discuss the results of the Gen 2 survey. So I just want to kind of give you a heads up on that, and that's coming next year. So where are we today? Right now, the faith is not doing well. It just is not doing, by all the statistics that we're seeing. Some may say, well, in our denomination, we're kind of doing okay. Personally, I think it's cross-denominational. I think everybody's struggling. We're struggling. I'm in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, been a pastor for 12 years. I'm telling you, it is a struggle. It is a major struggle. I feel like I'm fighting for every single young person that we can get. I'm on my knees hours and hours at a time praying that God would have mercy on my family and the families represented in our church and the sons of single moms whom I'm discipling myself in my mentorship center and on and on and on. It's a struggle. It's a struggle right now. The faith is struggling in this generation. I do believe it's under the sovereignty of God. I believe these times have happened in the history of the world, and we're not entirely unique. And yet, numbers-wise, this is a very, very significant time for us. Now, the family's not doing well either, and most of you know, if you listen to my radio show, you know that this is a huge concern of mine, in that 42% of kids are born without fathers on their birthday, up from 6% in 1960. That's a sevenfold increase. It's a sevenfold increase. And it should tear your heart out to think about all of those children. By the way, to ladies 30 years and younger, it's a 50% margin, meaning that the next generation is even worse. And the majority of kids will not be raised by parents over the next generation, the majority. In other words, if you're a nuclear family and you're still staying together somewhere in America, you will be in the minority. I'm not sure what that means in terms of social service persecution and that sort of thing. Sometimes, the good guys get persecuted. We'll see what happens in the future. But the family is not doing all that well either. Freedom. So where is freedom today? Freedoms are sort of disappearing too. Remember, our founders would say, I think it's Benjamin Franklin would say, either you'll be governed by God or by God you'll be governed. And what he's saying is either you'll be governed by God's morality in your individual lives, or by God's sovereign hand you will be tyrannized. In other words, what he's saying is either there will be morality maintained within the households and the individual lives of a nation, or if there will not be morality maintained and strong families maintained, then you can expect a rising tyranny. Now, the reason why I like that quote is because it tends to put everything together, and that's what I want to do tonight. I want to point out to you that all these things are interconnected. And the conservative talk show hosts who've had 4 to 5 divorces and want to clean up the tyranny in America, how do you think it's going to work out for him? Wild guess. How do you think it's going to work out? It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't pay to be a conservative. Your family's a wreck. You say, well, where is that in the Bible? I would say it's 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 5. If a man can't rule his own household well, how in the world can he rule in the household of God? How can he step up and become an elder in the church or a leader in society if his own family's in shambles? So the Bible presents a wonderful social theory. The Marxist theory is we'll just get somebody in government to fix all of these problems, right? Marxists have been doing that for 150 years. That's their social theory. Our social theory is, why don't we get a bunch of good moms and dads together with a vision for being good, godly leaders in their own homes and disciple their children as they sit in the house as they walk by the way, and eventually maybe we'll see some freedoms show up along the way. And I'm a little bothered with what's going on by our nation. I mean, the fact that we are being taxed about 7 or 8 or 10 times more than we were in 1900. I think it was 8% of the GNI taxed or used in government spending in 1900. You fast forward 100 years, where are we today? Close to 60%. That is on local, state, and national levels. There's all kinds of government everywhere. I mean, we can go on and on. I made a list yesterday, I think, when I was in studio, of the 10 or 20 or 300 things that you could do in 1970 that you cannot do today. It's incredible. I mean, if you want to know, what we were doing, it's like, whoa, they could do that? Whoa, they were really free. They could walk through airports and walk onto a plane, just throw a ticket stub at a stewardess, and they were on the plane. Man, I don't know if they could keep their 45s on them or not, but that was impressive. I mean, the level of freedom people enjoyed even 30 years ago, really quite impressive. And recently in Colorado, man, things are getting rough. They took away every freedom they could possibly think of. They had a bill that said anything pro-life ever done in the last 30 years would be wiped off the slates. And the governor signed it with glee, And they got the civil unions thing through, and SB 200 passed a couple of years ago. In SB 200 was this bill signed by the governor where if you were to say anything in public perceived to be unwelcome to homosexuals, a year in prison. Now, I was at a press conference right after that bill was signed by our Governor Ritter, and it was my turn. So I got up, and guess what I said? I read the Bible. Kind of scary, huh? That's right. I read the Bible in public in the state of Colorado. Can you believe it? I got up in front of the TV cameras in a press conference, and I read from Leviticus chapter 20. If a man should be with a man as he's with a woman, the two of them have committed abomination, they shall both be put to death. And I looked up, stared into the camera lens, and said, I would guess that there are some homosexuals in the state of Colorado that would find that unwelcome. And then I challenged the governor, you come down and arrest me. I'm going to tell everybody in Colorado, break your law. We will break your law. And you can arrest us and put us in prison because, you know what? We've been going to prison for the last 2,000 years for offending people like you. And we'll continue to do it. So, they haven't arrested me yet. So, I guess that's the grace of God. But friends, you know, what do you think our founders would say about some of this stuff? I think they'd be horrified. But, man. But what if a million families in America were taken by the Word of God? What if as the Word of God is preached, as the 5th commandment, the 7th commandment, the 10th commandment was preached, do you think if a million families would hear the Word of God, children, honor your father and mother, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, etc., thy neighbor's stuff. Do you think maybe if they're impressed by the Word of God, not my word, but by the Word of God, do you think that maybe we could sustain something of the faith, family, and freedom in the years to come? I think so. I truly believe so. So what do we do? Well, somebody once said there are those who make things happen, there are those who watch things happen, and then there are those who wonder what happened. And that's really pretty much everybody. I'm just here to tell you that's pretty much everybody, because without a vision, the people perish. And you know, why? Why all this stuff? You know, why did we get to the point where we are today, where the family is just a wreck, and then freedoms are dissipating, and the faith is just sort of whimpering out? How do you get to this point? I think it's the fact that we don't have much vision, which means the Word of God hasn't really made an impression. People haven't seen how the Word of God really applies to this area or that area. And I believe that the Word of God does have that power to it. And so I'm going to just bring out 7 things today that hopefully will be a good beginning. I mean, as I was working on this topic, I got to thinking, wow, this is like what's wrong with the world and what we should do about it. You know, it's a really big topic. And how am I going to knock this out in the next hour? So I'll just do the best I can. And so my first point is this. I mean, it's the obvious point, I think. Proverbs 1 and verse 7 is the most basic stuff. In fact, some have asked me, what do you do to prepare our children for the future? With everything as broken down as it is, in terms of our educational system, our social systems, our economic systems, et cetera, how in the world will our children face the future? It's kind of the big question. What can I do right now to prepare my children for the future? And I tell them again and again, give them the Word of God, but give them the book of Proverbs. I can't think of a better idea. Honestly, you want to build your children's lives, your children's future, your children's education, politics, leadership, et cetera, on something solid. Give them the wisdom of the Proverbs. I know that John Maynard Keynes disagrees with the book of Proverbs because he's smarter. He has a better socioeconomic theory of fractional reserve banking and the encouragement of debt in a society. I know he's smart. I know he's taken, 4 trillion people around the world to use his system. And so you have John Maynard Keynes versus, God in the book of Proverbs. Now, I'm just going to give you a wild guess here. Whatever they're doing is suicidal, is destructive, and I really think that the old wisdom found in that old book, if you just dust it off, and you look at that old book of Proverbs, and you teach the book of Proverbs to your children, every single verse from the beginning to the end of it, such that they've memorized it, they know how it applies in 100,000 different areas. If you give your children the book of Proverbs, I think they're going to be okay. I just have that sense. Why? Because God knows more than Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes and John Paul Sartre and everybody else has tried to construct the culture that we have made for ourselves today. So give children the book of Proverbs. I mean, we've done our Proverbs Bible study guides. I got 3 of them put together because to me it's something you've got to get into, and I couldn't find any other approach or educational curriculum on it. And by the way, we're also doing kind of fill-in-the-blank stuff for 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. We've got a workbook that was just released for the book of Proverbs. And so if you've got little guys or older guys, anywhere from 8, 9 to 17, 18 years of age, be sure you're doing a book of Proverbs. And the most fundamental lesson in the book of Proverbs is Proverbs 1:7. I mean, that's like the most fundamental lesson in all of education. Be sure that you have it. Don't leave home without it. Education has got to be founded on what? The fear of God. The beginning of knowledge is the fear of God. I mean, that's just so basic. I don't think we've thought about it enough. I don't think the average teaching college in America, as teaching future Christian school teachers or public school teachers, any kind of teachers, I don't think teaching colleges are going, you got to, whatever happens, man, you've got to give them the fear of God. You've got to do it in chemistry and biology and history. Got to give them the fear of God. You know, I just don't think they preach it like that, do they? Has anybody been to teaching college in America? They teach it like that. They go, oh, you've got to teach the fear of God. Whatever you do, if you teach science, you can't just teach them about the magnitude of this universe with all the galaxies and the incredibly complexity of the human cell, which, by the way, great interview with Dr. Georgia Purdom at AIG just 2 days ago on my show. If you want to know about the human cell and DNA, wow, this is like 100,000 times more complicated than anything Bill Gates and the whole Microsoft team has ever done. This is like wild good. God is amazing. He really is. And by the way, we know 100,000 times more about the human cell than we did in 1920. Now, let me ask you this. You think we're giving God 100,000 times more glory for the human cell than we did in 1920? I don't think so. We're giving him less glory. Man alive, if there's ever a time to give God the glory, it'd be now. Teach the beginning of wisdom as the fear of God, which means worship God. Which means get amazed by God, be awed by God. And allow yourself to just fall down on the floor or fall down on the sand and worship the God who just created that amazing landscape and that beautiful sunset. It's just not enough worship. Not enough fear of God going on in our lives, huh? You know why? Because we don't do that except on Sunday. Right? Now, right? We don't do that except on Sunday. We let the pastor do that. He's the real holy guy. He's paid to be good. The rest of us are good for nothing. So we're not going to do any of that worship on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We're not going to integrate it into our history and science and chemistry labs. But you know what? You don't teach the fear of God as the beginning of wisdom for about 100 years. What do you think is going to happen to, the families in America? What do you think is going to happen to the economic system? What do you think is going to happen to science? What if you train a bunch of scientists not to fear God in the chemistry laboratories for like 100 years? And after a while, they're doing all kinds of strange stuff with genetic engineering, and they're creating weapons of mass destruction, and fill in the blank. What do you think man is going to do if they create a bunch of scientists who haven't feared God for 100 years? Anybody want to guess? Scary. That's all I'm saying. Just leave it there. Scary. It's just scary. Whatever you do, don't do that. Beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. So how do you get from A, in Adam's fall we sinned all, which was the very first lesson in the New England Primer back in 1666 or whatever, 1652. And then you fast forward 400 years, and now you got this, Heather has to daddy stuff. And I don't know, man, you don't want to be reviewing a lot of the stuff that 5th grade kids and 8th grade kids and 11th grade kids are reading these days, okay? Don't even bother going to the Barnes & Noble bookstore and picking up a book for 9th grade girls. Scary. Somebody told me he tried it. He found all kinds of porn. Kind of stuff dirty old men would read back in 1970. Okay, so all I'm saying is, wouldn't you all agree that A, in Adam's fall we sinned all, down to Heather Has Two Daddies is a book for kindergarten kids in 1994. Wouldn't you say that's a disconnect there? There's a distance there. Yeah. So how does that happen? But that you have to secularize education. You just have to. You have to go after education. You have to secularize it. And it's John Dewey who's so happy. And I talk about this in my book, Apostate, because I'm really trying to trace it. How does this happen? Where you had capital crimes for certain kinds of aberrant sexuality in 1780. And now there are pastors in Canada and soon pastors in America who will be arrested for speaking against this stuff. So how does this happen? But that there had to have been a shift in worldview. There has to be an apostasy. I call them apostates. There has to be a lot of Christians who walk away from the faith, largely through universities and through education systems, that radically change their perspective, their basic worldview. And that's what John Dewey does when he does his little gaga thing over Charles Darwin in a book published in like 1920, where he talks about the legacy of Charles Darwin. He says, Darwin has released us from 2,000 years of the fixed and the final, which is, guess what? Jesus and his word. So finally, by 1920, modern man has been released from 2,000 years of the fixed and the final. And he's like, oh yeah, hallelujah, except he didn't say that because there's no God. And then he said, God is a faded piece of metaphysical goods. Wow, that's pretty intense, huh? God is a faded piece of metaphysical goods. God is passé. God's a non-factor. We haven't been considering God in classrooms for a long time. God is so distant from the reality of the average person. You might have a little, 30 minutes of God here and there, but it's not like integrated, doesn't flow through anymore. It's not part of the warp and woof. And to be honest with you, even in my own life, it's been really hard to understand God as one who is there. Right there. I mean, like he's right here, right now. It's so hard. It's like we don't quite live that way as we really ought to. Remember one time we were on a trip out here to Oregon on I-80. Remember that? It was the middle of winter, and Brenda was driving the car, and I was half asleep riding shotgun. And she hits the only patch of ice on I-80. And I wake up, she's screaming, help me, Jesus! Which is a bad sign, by the way. If you're going 80 miles an hour down I-80 on somewhat of a snowy day, and we're going sideways down the highway, and she starts to get charismatic. She lifts her hands, kind of what you say, help me, Jesus, take the wheel kind of moments, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, I got charismatic. I'm Presbyterian, but I got real charismatic. All of a sudden, Lord, help us. I started screaming real loud, Lord, help. I remember counting, Lord, help us now. I tried to time his help. Now would be good. I remember using the word now. And the Lord, I tell you, I kid you not, the Lord took our vehicle right off the side of the road, and we plowed snow for about 200 feet, came to a stop. And I didn't know we had stopped because we were all covered with snow. It was like an igloo all around our car. And we just kind of dug into a hole. And I'm looking out, I think we're stopped. Are we all alive? We're all alive. Yeah, we're good. Kids, you can wake up. It's all over. God saved our lives. I mean, it was one of those moments, we sang to God be the glory. Great things, tears coming down our eyes, cheeks. God be the glory, great things. And we meant it that time. And it was always as if God was right there in the car with us, right there. God was real, right there. But he's not always so real, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes God has to be so real that you just feel the weebie-jeebies going back up and down your back because you know that somebody else is in the car with you. Somebody else just saved your life. Somebody else, his hand is just right there on you. I don't get those moments very much. But I wish it was all the time. You know what I'm saying? I wish it was all the time. I miss God because naturalistic metaphysic that just we swim in. Through all the TV and all the National Geographic programs and all the shows that we watch and all the educational stuff we go through, it's just God is so distant. He's hardly there anymore. You can't hardly bring up his name. You can't fall down your knees. Tears coming down your cheeks in the middle of science. You're explaining it to these kids. Just say, I got to worship now. I just got to worship. That doesn't happen very much. Why? Because God is hardly a factor in the present day. What in the world does this have with faith, family, and freedom? Honestly, I think it has everything to do with it. I think it does. I think it's fundamental. But let's move on to number two. Number two is you got to get your worldview down straight, but you also got to get your social view down straight. See, we talk about sending our kids to the big university. Watch out for your worldview. We'll send you down to Summit and get you a good, worldview class for 2 weeks, and I recommend David Noble. And, some of the worldview stuff that's being done, Worldview Academy is good. So we get our worldviews down straight. We have to maintain your worldview. We have to be real careful. What about your social view? What about your social view? The social view that is being promulgated around us is oftentimes very, very little to do with a biblical social view. And let me give you a little bit of history, and maybe this will help you to understand what happened. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the father of the modern world. And I got a chapter on him in the book. I think he's important. I think he's really important. Paul Johnson believes the same thing. That's why the very first chapter in his book, Intellectuals, starts with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's an interesting madman who really had tremendous influence. Tremendous. If you drive up and down the streets of our modern cities and our modern nations, you go to Washington, D.C., you see all these things going on, all these buildings, all these schools, all these institutions. These are largely, more than anybody else, certainly more than John Calvin, these are the ideas, the conceptions of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, you say, why? Wow. Moving from 8% of the GNI to 60% of the GNI, that's a big shift. Okay, you don't have to be a huge economist to get this. 8% to 60%. That's a big shift. That's a big shift in government. How did that come about? Doesn't anybody ever ask the question? It's one of the it's a Doug question. How in the world did we go from 8% to 60%, where big government's everywhere, and there has been no decrease of this thing since 1900. No Republicans ever decreased any of it. It's just steady, steady, steady. Why? Does anybody ever ask why? Why? Whose big idea? Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea. He wrote a book called The Social Contract, but he also wrote a book on how to educate a child in the modern world, and he called that Emile. And in his book, he suggested a form of education largely funded by the state in which a child would be separated as soon as possible from all parents and adult relatives. That's roughly a quote from Will Durant, who summarizes Emile. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau also, you need to know about him. He's a genius. He's huge in the history of philosophy and the development of the modern world. He's just huge, just absolutely huge. But remember, he's also the man who, when his live-in girlfriend had their first child, he took it and deposited on the steps of an orphanage in the middle of winter to die on the steps of the orphanage. He had 5 children. All 5 children he took to the steps of an orphanage and left them to die on the day they were born. And later somebody asked, hey, did you have boys or girls? He said, oh, I forgot to check the gender. Couldn't even remember. Boys or girls? I don't know, whatever. He shoveled his kids off to an orphanage, and that's the way the modern world formed. And he became the expert who told everybody how to do it over the succeeding 200 years. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said the best book ever written on education is Plato's Republic. In Plato's Republic, he talks about this wonderful world for the guardians in which the man and the woman come together for a temporary liaison. We won't say what happens, but evidently the woman has a child, and the child comes out of the womb onto a conveyor belt, and professionals take over from there. And here's what Plato says. No son shall know his father, and no father shall know his son. What's that mean? That means no father-son relationships. No father-son relationships. None. This is Plato. Why? Why is this so important? Because you have to obliterate the family to create the proper socialist state. Everybody got it? You have to. That's why by the time you get to Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, by the way, right smack in the middle of the Communist Manifesto, you've got, I think, the core of it, when he says, abolish home education, replace home education with social, which are exact words John Dewey picks up about 40 years later. But why does he say that? Why does Karl Marx, the great communist, say replace home education with social? Why does he say that? Because he says the goal is to obliterate the family or the family economy. And the whole idea of the Communist Manifesto, by the way, is that the bourgeoisie are the only ones who have a family economy. So because nobody else gets one, let's just obliterate all family economies and be done with all families. That's effectively the Communist Manifesto. It's not very difficult to understand what he's saying. But that's communism. So if any of you have ever wondered what communism, and that's communism. So again, why do all these movers and shakers of the modern world, why are they so focused on obliterating home education or obliterating the family as integrated in all these areas? Why? Because the family is not important in a humanist social construct. The family gets in the way of the development of the state. Now let me ask you this. After all these years, do you think that Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Karl Marx have been successful? With 42% of kids born outside of wedlock, half of marriages end in divorce. The nuclear family now makes up less than half of American families. And things are getting worse and worse. And I'm telling you, friends, I think they have been successful. I think they've been incredibly successful. Now, you might say, well, this really doesn't apply to some of us here, but you know what? It applies to all of us. It's impossible to entirely separate ourselves from what's going on. The tip of the iceberg sticks out, but there's more down below, and it's affecting all of us. I think we ought to be humble enough to say that we're part of this world, and we really need to see some change come about by way of repentance, metanoeo, and we shouldn't be running around telling all these other people to repent. Well, too bad for everybody else. Thankfully, none of this has affected us. It has affected us. And wherever it's affected us, then God calls us to repentance as well. I've always been an idealist, if you can believe that. Even when I was a child, I was an idealist. I would tell my mom, I'm going to go out there and clean up the world. And my mom would say something like this, that's fine, son. Why don't you go upstairs and start on your room? It's irritating to budding Marxists and guys who want to clean up the world by way of government, And I did want to get elected to governor of Colorado, run for governor and all the rest. But, I've learned over time that this is not really the fundamental strategy by way of cleaning up the world and cleaning up family and freedoms and things. It just doesn't work that way. And think about the battle for traditional marriage. And by the way, this is important. I think it's very important. I cover it on my program a lot because right now, this is the indication that civilizations are coming apart at the seams. This is it. Because this is a very weird thing. Okay, they're trying to do same-sex marriage, and it's happening all over the place. And you know what's weird is that, do you know who came up with the idea? Does anybody know who came up with the idea originally? It was Nero. This is Nero. Nero is considered the worst, most wicked, most incompetent, most destructive Caesar of the entire pagan world. The pagans hated him. And by the way, the Christians considered him to be the Antichrist or the beast, and they consider him to be the very, very, very worst. If you want to interview somebody in 475 AD who is the worst guy who ever lived in the history of the world, they would say, Nero. Well, now you have so many evangelical pastors saying, I think it's a good idea. Let's do Nero. Go Nero. Yeah, Nero. And we got Nero's agenda in Colorado. England just got it. Queen Elizabeth, I covered this 3 days ago. Queen Elizabeth said, go Nero. Queen Elizabeth, big on the Neronic agenda. Isn't that amazing? I just sitting there going, wow. Wow, did Nero get popular all of a sudden? And if you look at the map on Wikipedia, you're going to find it's almost all of Europe, 2/3 of South America, 14 states now in America, all of Canada, Australia, New Zealand. By the way, the pagan nations won't go for it. It's only the apostate countries. It's people who say, I really, really, really hate whatever God said in the Bible. Those guys are going for it gung-ho. The apostate nations love it, but not so much Africa. Not so much Asia, some of the nations that are more distant from the Western world. So, why? Why are we getting all this? Well, one of the things we know is that we have a generation trajectory going right now in which the millennial generation much more likely to be in favor of this kind of stuff. 70% are going for it. Right now it's about a 50-50 in America, but the millennial generation, they're going for it. They love it. If you have a master's degree, it's a 65-35 split in favor of the neuronic agenda. 65-35. Why? Because education has already won the battle. Do you follow me? If you don't fight the battle in the schools, if you lost it in the schools, put away your yard signs. What are you doing getting involved in politics? You know, why are you wasting your time? You didn't fight it over here. You didn't take on the public schools. You didn't say defund them. You didn't say we need to go after the basic fundamental Dewey approach to education, bring the fear of God back into education. You didn't say, no, I didn't want to go that far. I didn't really want to go that far. I didn't want to clean up the schools. I didn't want to go into education. And so now you're going to fight it later on in the politics. It ain't going to work. It's not going to work. Okay, but there's a second reason why we're going to lose this battle. We're going to continue to lose it. I've been saying this for about 8 years now. But the second reason is because of Dobson's book, Bringing Up Boys. It's a pretty good book in spots. I'd recommend it. But there's one point in which he says the reason why you have a huge increase in the incidence of homosexuality, he says the number one factor, nurture factor, not nature. People make decisions based on their own sinful nature. We know that. That's given. They take responsibility for that. But there's a nurture element that plays into this. He says the number one nurture, according to a lot of people who have done a lot of work with homosexuals, is the lack of a loving, respectful relationship that man has with his own father. Now, this is big. This is big. He quotes a Christian guy who worked with hundreds of homosexuals, said never met one who had a loving, respectful relationship with his own father. And guys, I'm telling you, the hearts of the sons have really, really strayed from the fathers. Generation by generation by generation over a very long time. And here we are today. So many generations. The hearts of the fathers and the sons have been very, very distant. And when that little boy is 9 or 10 years of age, he still wants to be with Dad. He wants to be like Dad. He's wearing Dad's shoes. He wants that relationship with his dad. And friends, the future is not made up of yard signs and political races. The future is made up of hundreds of thousands of dads who make hundreds of thousands of decisions. When the dad is saying, it's about materials, I've got to make the money. I've got to make the money. I don't have the time. Now again, I'm not saying how God is working or will be working in your life or my life. I would tell you He's worked in my life many, many times. But when a father makes the decision, I've been working all week, I want to go do my golf game, and I don't really want to spend the time with my son right now, or I got to work the second job because I got to do this, I got to do that, and really his son's heart is crying out to Dad for Dad's involvement in his life. And he says, no, friends, he's already determined what is going to happen in the future when it comes to issues like homosexuality. You see, we got to get into fundamentals. We got to address the fundamentals. We're in trouble. It's not as if, we're looking at statistics. 7 times worse here, 10 times worse here. Shack-up rate, 10 times worse than it was in 1970. This 7 times worse. This 28 times worse. Young men, 80% of them, 80% of young men are hooked on the wrong websites. 80%. And they didn't even have these things. You didn't have access to these things back in the 1960s and 70s. And now it's the majority of young men. I mean, it's like Pandora's box opened. And when we look at society, we look at the fracturing of the family, it's not as if the car has a dent on the bumper. No. The car has been a major accident, and the steering wheel is in the trunk. See, there's something fundamentally wrong. And if we can get people to understand this, that ultimately the problem, of course, is that we have rejected God, the fear of God. We're no longer repenting of our sins. We're no longer really clinging to Christ. for that salvation from our sins, etc., etc. But friends, it's not as if we're going to fix these things with duct tape. It's not as if we're somehow going to fix the family with a 20-minute family time stuck on a Friday night. Or that somehow Western civilization is going to be salvaged by a hockey mom from Alaska with another child born out of wedlock. You follow me here? If people are saying, if we could just get a hockey mom to salvage Western civilization and deliver us from Egypt and free us from all this tyranny, but oh yeah, she's got another child with another child born out of wedlock, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. What do we tell her? What do we tell any of us? Go home. Go home. If the nation's in trouble, go home. If the state's in trouble, go home. If your church is in trouble, go home. Just go home. You see, we got to go first things first. It's like sometimes we're the people who are saying we've got to clean the carpets, but that's not the issue. Imagine you've been through a 9.0 earthquake on the Richter scale, and somebody comes to your busted up house and says, I'm here to clean your carpets. What do you say? You say, I don't need carpet cleaning. I need concrete for my basement. Get me concrete. Concrete for my basement. See, what we don't need, carpet cleaning, window dressing. We need fathers and mothers laying concrete in their basements, building new foundations for the future churches and for the future of this nation. Somebody say amen. Amen. You're supposed to say amen occasionally, otherwise I kind of lose wind. How much more time do I have? I have another hour. No. Let me just give you a few other things. Systemic problems call for systemic solutions. Which means if the family is disintegrated, the family has to be reintegrated. And the disintegration of the family has happened over a long period of time. How do we reintegrate the family? This has been a huge challenge for me, and I've grappled with it in many different ways. We have tried to reintegrate the family in education. We'll give you a couple other ideas like family worship and discipleship and other things. But we need a context, because remember, what Marx and others have done has been to disintegrate the family economy. And the word economy comes from oikonomia, or the idea of oikos is family, nomia is law. And so what you have is the law of the family, or the vision of the family. And the family has always been the basic economic unit, not the individual. And what's happened in raising our sons and daughters for the last at least 3 to 4 generations, we have raised our sons and daughters to think of themselves as seeking their own individual career job, not working for the fundamental family economy unit, like what used to happen for 5,900 years of world history. People have disintegrated the family in their minds. See, at one time, it was the heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need to spoil. The husband and the wife were together as a household economy. But that has disappeared over a period of time. Rachel doesn't feed her father's sheep. Rebecca doesn't feed her father's sheep. David doesn't feed his father's sheep. Aquila and Priscilla, they are not tent makers anymore. See, these are the concepts we get in Scripture. The fourth commandment itself. You're supposed to work 6 days. 7th day is Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, maidservant. What's the assumption here? What's the assumption that's been around for 5,900 years? But the family economy. The family economy. It wasn't like you shuffled your kids off. See, what has happened over time is that the kids were moved from the family economy onto the corporations. And that was the kind of thing that the early social people were fighting against, because the corporations were taking over the children, and then you had the child labor laws and the compulsory attendance laws, where the state says we'll take the children, to this point where the compulsory attendance laws are such in our states that we were in a battle over the expanding compulsory attendance law in our state. Homeschoolers tend to come down and say, hey, wait a minute, we need more freedom for parents. We don't want little 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds or 5-year-old boys bolted to chairs and doing their ADD thing for 7 hours a day when they could be running around and doing active things and plowing the fields next to dad. See, we like a little liberty in these areas. And most Americans don't see this to be necessary, except for books like Dr. Christina Hofsummer's War Against Boys and a lot of other things where boys have been terribly disenfranchised. We have a huge breakdown in boyhood. We'll talk about that tomorrow. It's completely, sociologists and even non-Christians are saying it's just a sad, sad disintegration of all social systems, and that's happening right now. But see, they're fighting for the compulsory attendance law to be widened and more restrictive, and they have carved out some exceptions for homeschoolers in our state several times. But the goal is to see the state's control over those children. And a judge who was fighting tooth and nail against the homeschoolers for this in our state, he turned to us and said, on the compulsory attendance law, he turned to everybody in the room and he said, all of your children belong to us. Okay, that's the battle right there. That's it right there. The statists, the socialists say, you handed your kids off to the corporations in the 1800s. The corporations handed them off to us through the compulsory attendance laws and the child labor laws. Children do not belong to the family economy anymore. That's the fundamental battle right now, I think, for freedom in our country. And it's going to be a tough one, because we're going to be increasingly in the minority in the years to come. In the Bible, the family worked together. This is all very weird, by the way. Most individualists think family working together? Families feared God together. Families were baptized together. Some of you, oh, that's really scary. You mean they were all baptized? Yeah, they were all baptized together. They worked together. They were a team together. They were integrated together on multiple levels. But in the modern age, they're disintegrated. You hardly find an instance of teenage rebellion in the New Testament. You hardly find it in church history. All the way up to almost the present day. Why? Because of the massive disintegration of the family that came through so many different ways. You need to have a right assessment of the opposition forces. The fact that you have 88% of kids walking away from the church, according to the Southern Baptists, is significant to me. 97% of kids no longer have that Christian worldview, whereas their parents did. That's significant to me. If I was faced with a heretical hypothetical of would you send your kids to a public school with possibly a non-Christian teacher for 6 hours a day for the next 6 years of their life, or will you give them 6 hours a day of their peer culture, which means pop culture, which means all the music, which means Lady Gaga and Katy Perry and everybody else? Okay, which would you take if you could do one or the other, gun to the head? It's either 6 hours of public school teaching where God's not being feared, or 6 hours of teen culture, or peer culture. Which would I choose? I would choose the classroom in a heartbeat. You know why? Because generally speaking, most kids don't pay attention to what is happening in the schoolroom. Praise God. I mean, I'll make exceptions for the Christian teachers doing work, and I understand that. And God bless you for being out there, and I know there's some of you out there doing some work in the public schools, and I appreciate that. But I'm saying in general, guys, these are secular places. They're secular places. And these kids are learning how to think like secularists in these schools. But not so much in the schoolroom as in the playground. This is my major concern. I think the culture has way more influence on our children than we think. I've been bringing up the Star Trek thing for the last couple of weeks, and I've had so much pushback. It's amazing. I took umbrage with the latest Star Trek movie. And there's so many Christians that apparently just love Star Trek. And they got so offended. When I don't know how to explain this in the audience. What Captain Kirk was doing in the recent movie, I didn't even watch it. I had it described to me. I've had it described to me many times from people who watched it. Is shocking. Unspeakable. And the most shocking thing about it is that most of the American Christians that are watching Star Trek are not shocked. I'm just amazed. They can't see it. They can't see it. I'll just say this. I consider orgies unspeakable things. And I won't get into the detail as to what an orgy is. Utterly unspeakable things. Not just a social faux pas, which was the way it was presented in the last Star Trek. They were capital crimes, I believe, being done, at least biblically speaking. And Christians, lots and lots of Christian teenagers, are so upset with me for taking a hardline position against some of the worst moral outrages that I think have ever been committed on the screen outside of X-rated movies. But I keep asking myself, why? Why? And these are nice kids attending nice little fundamentalist reformed churches or whatever. Why? Why wouldn't they see it? Why can't they see it? Because they're soaking in it. You understand? They're soaking in it. And you say, why can't we penetrate that in the church? Why don't kids receive the message much anymore? Because they've got the electrodes plugged into their brains. They're into the matrix. And unless you unplug them from the mass culture, there is no way you'll ever be able to disciple them in your youth groups. You've got to get them out of the matrix. And my suggestion, and I think this is about right, if our children watch a major motion picture for 2 hours in a week, they should be in the Bible for 20 hours that week. Does everybody get me? I thought that was an exaggeration, but I've been assessing it in my own mind with my own family. If your children, maybe you're watching a movie that needs to be examined and discerned, and we have done that a number of times in our family. We've done it largely because a lot of our friends are watching movies all the time, and my children are getting that input constantly. And so I go to the theater. I've done this a number of times the last 3 years. I sit next to them. I eat the same popcorn. We sip out of the same drink because they're so expensive. And we watch the movies, and we fill up tablets of paper. And last time I did it, I typed up 3 pages. I made copies, and after Bible time, where we read the Word, we sang the Psalms, after about an hour of that, I pulled out the 3 pages, and line by line, we studied the movie, and we contrasted it with a biblical worldview on about 8 different levels. Because you can't be simplistic. Please, please, stop just counting cuss words and trying to find a Jesus metaphor, okay? Please, stop being so cotton-picking simplistic with this culture and develop the multi-layers, the ethical layer, the metaphysical layer, the social layer. Develop the layers. These things sink into you. If you can't do that, don't do it at all. Analyze them. Contrast them with a scriptural approach. And I think it's a quantity issue, to be honest with you. If your children want to be in the theater for 20 hours and can hardly stand 2 hours a week in the Bible, there's something really wrong. I'm just finding that in order for our children to come to know the Lord, we have to disciple them as we sit in the house, as we walk by the way, as we rise up, as we lie down. It doesn't say that you got to get them to a church camp, throw a pine cone in the fire, get a little emotional moment for Jesus, and everything's hunky-dory for the rest of their lives. Please, there's nothing like that in the Bible, okay? That's not in the Bible. That's something someone came up with. No. What we do is we get in the Word of God, and we teach them as we walk by the way. By the way, it's got to be integrated. Oh, look at that sign over there. That looks like a Proverbs 5 woman. That's a Proverbs 7 woman. Son, that's a Proverbs 7 woman. Just saw her. I'm sure you saw her too, so I had to point it out. What are we doing? We got to integrate. We got to integrate. They got to be soaking in the Word of God. All the time. All the time. Hebrews 3:13 says, and I think this is key for any kind of discipleship, my study of where they have not only salvaged the faith, but where the faith actually conquered entire territories. where entire kingdoms came to eventually serve Jesus Christ in the history of missions, and I've done some study of this, guess what the pattern is? The pattern is daily, 7 days a week. This 1 day a week little Sabbath experience for 20 minutes, no. The Chaldeans, the Puritans, many other people throughout history, where there was a truly serious effort to disciple the nations, it had to be daily. It could happen with the church, with the bells that rang twice a day, or it could happen in the family, either way. Okay, bring the Word of God in. Do it on a daily basis. Okay, number 5, relationships matter. Relationships matter. I took a look at an example of a woman who apostatized from the faith, a young woman. She apostatized from the faith. She's a daughter of a very well-known apologist in America. And she became an atheist. And I'll just say one thing. She had all kinds of problems, all kinds of truth issues. She became an atheist because she didn't have all her questions answered, but that wasn't really it. At the very beginning, she said, at 17 years of age, I ran away from home for reasons not pertinent to this article. And right there, I grabbed it and said, that's it. They are pertinent. Why did she want to run away from home? Why? Because the relationships broke down. Do relationships and the faith matter in the Christian home? Absolutely. Absolutely. Huge. And where there is no real love from a father to a daughter, or a dissipating love of fathers to daughters, and where the daughter doesn't love the father. We'd say relationships, it's just a matter of love and honor. If the daughter isn't honoring the father and loving the father's not loving the daughter. We have a breakdown, we have a disconnect, we have a desire for emancipation, we have a runaway on our hands. The relationships matter. Somehow they weren't comfortable with each other. Somehow they didn't like each other. Somehow they didn't love each other. This is core to the dissipation of the faith. In the 21st century, may God really get this message in the hearts of fathers who need to love their daughters. I mean, 1 Corinthians 13, agape, sacrificial love for their daughters. Tears running down their faces as they look into their daughter's eyes. I love you, honey. I want you to love Jesus. I don't want you going to hell. I love you so much. I would give my life for you, hon. And daughter saying, Dad, I love you. Dad, I honor you. You're my hero, Dad. I love to talk to you. I'd love to hear you talk to me. I'd love to hear your advice. Tell me more, Dad. Where you have that relationship, the faith will sustain. The faith will sustain. Okay, relationships matter. I know I'm way over time. Number 6, the 5th commandment matters. I'll deal with that more tomorrow. But the 5th commandment does matter. It's one of 10. Why do things not go well for us in child evangelism? Why do things not go well for us in our children coming to know Jesus? Why do things not go well for us in terms of relationships, etc.? Children not honoring their parents. And let me just say this. In every case I have counseled, in relation to the rebellion of children in a home, it had something to do with the father's relationship with the grandfather. I'll just say that. Relationships matter. And if the relationship with your father, dads, has broken down, or moms, and by the way, my wife's relationship with her father was restored in a marvelous way about 4 months before he died. It was beautiful. And God used that, by the way, to bring about his salvation. It was amazing. Ask my wife about the story. I don't have time. Well, where are we today? We're in trouble, friends. We're in so much trouble. 2011 was an interesting year. 2011 marked the year where the baby boomers started retiring. And for the first time, the Social Security fund went into the red. Now, what does that mean? What that means is over 18 years, we will see the Social Security fund in the red. And what we're also seeing is 80 million retiring baby boomers who, by the way, oversaw the abortion of about 80 million kids through the abortuaries and the abortifacient birth control pill. What do you think is going to happen in the future with that world out there? This is not complicated. Just do the math. We have the most pro-infanticide president ever to serve as president of the United States. We have 80 million baby boomers who aborted roughly 80 million babies. They're soon to retire. The Social Security fund is in the red. We're moving towards a socialized health care system for these people. Come on, what do you think is going to happen? You know what's going to happen. Euthanasia. Lots of it. Lots of it. But friends, not us. Amen? Not us. I'm challenging you tonight. Will you restore relationships with your parents, with your children? Will we adopt rather than abort? Yes, we will. Will we care for the elderly, including our own parents? Will we plan right now? Years ago, I wrote to my parents and said, I'm here. Take care of you. If you ever need help, I'm here. Will you take care of your own parents? We'll do that while the others will be doing euthanasia. We'll be discipling our boys and our girls. We'll throw our lives into mentorship and discipleship. That's what I'm doing. While the rest of the world is just allowing 70% of young men not to grow up by 30 years of age, up from 30% in 1970. Young men are just loose and they're not growing up. They're not being mentored. They're not being discipled. The character of the nation is in free fall right now. And our children will learn honor for parents while the rest are rebelling and continuing the teen rebellion pattern that leads to revolution and more destruction. I would encourage here parents, children to establish a legacy of generational faithfulness, a heritage of repentance and faith in your generation. Bodhi Baucham talks about what's happening with evangelicalism. 35 million evangelicals today. And he said they're not doing well. 88% leaving the faith. Their birth rate is like 1.5, 1.6, birth imploding. By 2100, there'll be 350,000 left in America. In America. The way they're going, there'll be 350,000 left of the 35 million. I did my own calculation. I have 5 children. If all 5 of them love the Lord and serve the Lord, and by His grace, they're saved, and partially because I've thrown myself into the discipleship of my children over the last 18, 20 years, and their 5 children serve the Lord, and the next generation, and by God's grace, there's more discipleship and a vision to see more of this, and the next generation, and the next, and the next. You know, after 8 generations, by the year 2100, I've got 350,000 believers in Jesus Christ, and I've beat 35 million evangelicals all by myself. 35 million versus Kev. A generational vision. A generational vision. What could this accomplish? Well, all by the grace of God. All by the grace of God. Let me challenge the young people here, including my own children standing in the back. I want to challenge you, children. You have a heritage. As I had a heritage, you have a heritage. Your parents have given you something. They've given you perhaps more than other kids. Quite a bit more. These are your talents. Don't bury them in the ground. Multiply them. Stand on your parents' shoulders, or at the very least, get up on their knees. You have an advantage if you honor that heritage. And it's important that you do so because you're up against what I would call the biggest challenge the world has seen. We're looking at a socioeconomic implosion of the entire world. I mean, we're looking at the next generation facing more debt than any other generation. Europe is coming down right now debt-wise. America's only going to get worse. And the worker-to-retiree ratio in 20 years from now will be 1/3 of what it was in 1950 and 1/10 of what it was in 1950 in South Korea and Japan. You say, well, the character of the worker is going to be great. With 70% of them not grown up by 30 years of age, up from 30% in 1970, while they're playing games and Rome is burning? You really think that 41% of kids born out of wedlock is going to do better than 7% or 6% did in 1960? You're smoking something. The world's in trouble. They've ruined it. They've trashed it. But you see, our children are going to face a serious challenge. But I think they can do it by the grace of God, standing on their parents' shoulders, taking on a challenge that God has given them for such a time as this. I think we're going to be in a war between good and evil, and our backs are against the wall right now, certainly in terms of freedom, certainly in terms of the faith. We are in Helm's Deep. We are in Helm's Deep. Any of you know that analogy? We got tens of thousands of orcs coming down. There's 100 people defending the women and children at the head of that cave. And we are in Helm's Deep. And I hope that the children here would recognize that, understand they have an obligation to continue to fight. What if someone says, I'm just going to play video games in the back while all this stuff comes down? No, you can't do that. You have no option to do that. I'm going to join the other side. I'm going to go over and fight for the orcs. That's the worst treason of all. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't leave us now. The warning is to take up your responsibilities. Give God the thanks for what God has given you in terms of your heritage. And use your heritage well. Use your heritage well. Amen. Thank you.